Now, did you get? For those who don't know, we actually share the same. We share the same agent, which is how we first crossed paths. Did you meet Simon, who's our agent? Did you meet him or start working with him before your book came out, or after your book came out?
Well, Simon, or young Lipscar, as he should be known, is not my agent. My agent is Al Zuckerman, the founder of
Oh,
the company.
that's right. My apologies.
Lipscar is just his fiendish son-in-law, who is brilliant in his own right. But so it was Al Zuckerman, the great Al Zuckerman, one of the last truly great gentlemen of letters, as a PhD in literature, taught at Yale, served in the Navy, was a young ambassador for America. I adore Al Zuckerman. He's a great man, the founder of Writers House. And part of his greatness is reflected through Simon. Young Lipscar is also brilliant. I mean, he's a composer, he's a conductor, he's incredibly good with technology, but he's also a literary man. And I think what we all have in common, you, Simon, Al, and myself, is that we all come from very different backgrounds, and then we come into publishing. You know, we don't come in as this classical, the sort of more classic model of having studied writing at school and then making our way as a cadetship through a newspaper or a magazine and then moving into publishing. We don't follow that traditional path. We come to writing almost as a second profession, and so it makes our success perhaps all the more surprising, but certainly very enjoyable.
How did you end up getting representation at Writers House? Because I think that's something a lot of aspiring writers are curious. You know, how do I get published? How do I get an agent?
Well, all excellent questions. I think it's a little bit different for me in so much as my Blue Day book series, for those who haven't seen it, it's a very visual series. It didn't fit into a particular genre. The format, I drew a square on a napkin and said, I think it should be this. And now that's a format now, but it wasn't then. So we're going back to the late 90s. I had a lot of failure. I was incredibly committed to failure for many years leading up to finally getting success. And because you don't need a literary agent in every part of the world. If you're like me and you're from a smaller country in terms of population like Australia or New Zealand or wherever else, you don't necessarily have to have one. In America and the UK, the big markets, you definitely do. And if you don't speak the language, you obviously need a representative to help you. But I went around on my own and presented the book a lot. It got some interest, but people didn't know where the book would fit because it was a humorous book. It also was a very emotional story, somewhat uplifting. It could be construed to be kind of a miscellaneous self-help book. It was a little bit difficult to pigeonhole it, and it was so graphic. There was an image of every page. I would marry a funny black and white photo of an animal with my narrative, and that was the way I constructed the story, which obviously being a cartoonist makes sense, but it didn't fit in. So I had to find an agent who was a generalist, not someone who specialized in a particular genre, and they're out there, and they're fantastic. So, for example, there are agents at Writers House in New York, and they just do literary fiction, or they just do, thrillers, or they just do historical fiction, or just do illustrated children's books, or just do young adult thrillers. I mean, and they're fantastic. Remember, we come from an agency that represents everybody from Captain Underpants to the Twilight series, and and Nora Roberts. I mean, my God, what she sold, 400 million books or something ridiculous. So we have everybody at Writers House. And so what drew me to Writers House was the fact that strategically they had a number of generalists there. I looked at Al Zuckerman's list, and he had a great range of material. I thought, well, if I don't fit in there, I don't fit in anywhere. And having failed to actually get representation before that, this was sort of my only hope. So I did that, and he did love it. But what was funny is that we had 12 offers. He took it to lunch with him the next week, and we had a dozen offers from publishers in America for the Blue Day book immediately, and then all of them disappeared. Because they said, we love this, we think it's hilarious, and they went back to their publishing boards, and they said, well, but where does it fit in? How do we promote this? And that's part of the problem as well. You have to be strategic in your publisher, someone who has already had success with a book that is in some way reflective of your values, your style, your genre, your writing, your themes, whatever. So I think of it from a military point of view now, when I'm talking to everybody else that's breaking into the game, and I say, here's what you do. Your hunt for a great literary agent and a great publisher starts with your own bookshelf. Turn around, have a look at your favorite books that in some way have inspired your own or are reflected in it that are best sellers. find out who that literary agent is, find out who that editor is, and that's who you pitch. And if you do that, you'll save yourself a lot of heartache.
On the flip side, I'd also say that it's important that basically you find someone who you like and who likes you and who likes your work and wants to work with you. Because in the case of young Lipscar, he hadn't published, he hadn't represented any fantasy or young adult authors prior to Aragon. And I mean, in fact, mainly he worked with authors who wrote thrillers and that sort of thing, very, very adult stuff. So I wouldn't have looked at his track record and say, yes, this is the best place for Aragon. Ultimately, I think it's a balance between what you're just saying and finding the right people to work with. So, but
I agree.
Look, I mean, because also if I'd submitted Aragon to a publisher, I would have submitted to probably Tor or Ballantine or Daw, one of the big fantasy sci-fi publishers, not Knopf of all things.
Yeah,
right?
And that's the thing. You should never be lured by the imprint. People on the outside of the business make the mistake of thinking that publishers are their imprint, and they're not. A publishing house is not a homogenous entity. There are strong creative personalities all the way through it, and you're specifically targeting an individual person who could be passionate about what you're passionate about. And I completely agree with you in terms of that creative simpatico. My policy with an editor and an agent and doing business with other people in general is very, very simple. I would never work with someone who I wouldn't invite home to have dinner with my family. End of story.
That's a good rule.
It's a very simple,
Yeah.
the BTG rule, and I've stuck to that ever since I was in a position where I could make the rules myself, and it has always served me well. It's like Warren Buffett used to say that to him the definition of success is being able to choose who you work with and not having to work with people you don't like. So I think learning from him, at least in that humble regard, has served me well. You want good people in your life because, as you and I both know, regardless of the genre that is yours, it's a very intimate relationship with your editor and your agent because they're seeing work that's half-formed, ideas not fully fledged, and you don't want someone you can't trust giving you bad advice at that point.
No, not at all. In fact, bad advice at that point could not only kill the project, but could permanently impair your ability to create future projects, because at that point in the creative process, I think you're so vulnerable that bad advice could destroy your ability to function, actually. I mean, that might sound over the top to people who haven't been in that situation, but I don't think that's I don't think that's overstating things in the slightest.
No, I've seen it happen to a very dear friend of mine, and she showed a novel to the wrong person at the early stages, and they took offense to some aspect of it, the language or the themes, and not only did they not like it, they felt they were disappointed in her for taking that point of view, and she's written no novel since. So yeah, it really can, because the truth is, to reveal these stories is an intimate process, and that wounding you at that point is kind of like the shower scene in Psycho, where you're naked and wet. It's the worst possible time to be stabbed.
Yeah.
So you just don't want to put yourself in that position. Lock the damn door.
Versus finishing the first draft and giving it to the editor and getting the comments back, at which point you're still naked, but at least you've dried yourself off.
That's true. And here's the thing you have to know about people is that judging who should read your work. And it's never your family, generally speaking. It's never your best friends. It's people who know what books like before a book is like before it's finished. So the most erudite person you know, the most well-read person you know, is what we call a know-nothing consumer. All right? They might enjoy reading. They might be very intelligent. They might have done comparative literature at Berkeley, whatever. The point is, being well-read, being intelligent, and being a bibliophile is not a qualification to be an editor. It's a very, very specific profession, because these people who enjoyed reading books, they've all read finished works, and they've never seen what a work in progress should feel like. That's still 3, 4, 5, 7, 9 drafts away from being a book. An editor is brought up to know what that looks like, and so that knowledge is so important, because it steers you towards success or
Yeah.
failure. And not so much in my works are much shorter than yours, so it's not as intense. But when you're talking about plot lines and characters, oh my God, killing off a character before you've had a chance to let them
Yeah.
really flesh out would be a tragedy. So I think we definitely are very fortunate to be represented by Writer's House. Young Lipscar is actually a terrible human being, but I do love and respect him. And Sir Albert Zuckerman is one of the great men of letters, and I feel humble. Here is a man who did seminal academic work on Shakespeare. I don't know what he's doing with me, but I'm incredibly grateful.
Yeah. One of the things I was just thinking about too is one of the things I feel like I've learned with this, the whole creative process there, is that people, like you said, who aren't familiar with reading unfinished works, they'll get hung up on a badly written sentence or a few mischosen words. And you know
Yeah.
what? That doesn't really matter early on. You can fix a sentence. You can polish those rough words out. What really matters, at least in the beginning, is the underlying structure. When I read an unpublished manuscript, whether it's my own or someone else's, my first thought going through is, does the larger structure work? And all the rest you can fix later on. But if the underlying structure doesn't work, you don't have a book.
I completely agree. I mean, look, I'm a half decent speller. My punctuation is reasonably consistent, and compared to most people, you might think I'm almost, from a grammatical point of view, a pedant. I'll really be on it, but it's not even my problem. It's not the editor. It's a sub-editor problem to go through there and punctuate properly and make sure you haven't made silly typos. There's time for that. You've got to let the story breathe. You've got to let it get the legs under it and start running. Otherwise, if you cripple it in the early stages, it's never going to go anywhere.
Let's talk about your books for a minute. You have the Blue Day book, which is now. Was that your first book, or was that later?
That was my 8th book.
That was your 8th book.
But my first published work.
Ah.
So it took almost a decade to get published. So to all your viewers who are aspiring authors, you can take it from us that we had very different life experiences pertaining to how we got published. But mine is probably more typical in that, I wrote 7 very good books, I thought, leading up to this. But it was my 8th book, and I don't know, 50, 60, 100 rejections before it actually found a home. So it was quite a grind.
Did your earlier books end up getting published later on, or are they still sitting in a drawer somewhere?
They're still sitting in a drawer, and for good reason. It's funny because I had a deal for 3 of them and then fell through. The publisher went under, and that deal went under with them. These things happen when you're new to the business and you don't have quality representation or legal advice. And that's the kind of thing that can happen to you, which was very disappointing, although it was certainly an education I won't forget. But yeah, those early books are still sitting in drawers. And yes, I flatter myself that I could probably get them out now and dust them off and get them published somewhere. But I like to think, as every author does, that over that intervening period of time, it's 20 years, that I'm a much better writer now than I was then. And so the books look ridiculous to me now. I just think I can't work with that. If I wanted to do them, I would have to take them back to their basic essence and start again. So I think that's probably the only responsible thing to do. But who knows? I might just whore out for the money and publish them anyway. So we'll see.
The Blue Day book and other books in that series are. I think there's a lot of depth to them, even though it's easy for people maybe to look at them and say, oh, it's pictures of animals and, it's almost like, internet meme pictures, but it's not. I think there's a lot of depth to them. So what is it that really drives you to write these, and what is it you're trying to capture with your fiction and also your nonfiction?
Well, with my nonfiction, and certainly with the Blue Day series, what I'm trying to do is address a question or an issue that translates globally and of enduring importance. Issues about your sense of self. The Blue Day book is a book about perspective, and the emotional depth you speak of is that the only way for a book to succeed is that the author has to really love it, has to really care about it, and every book, however modest, contains a little piece of your soul, every single one. So if you're prepared to give that up, then your book is going to be something special. And if I'm honest, I'll say some books of mine are better than others. I try to make them all brilliant and original and lovely, but that's not always that they don't always stand the test of time. Even some that are very popular, you just go back to it and you go, "Oh, I wish I'd done this. I wish I'd done that." So it's best never to go back, to be honest, in that regard. Um, so with those books, what I'm trying to do is structure the books as if I was having a very interesting, intelligent, and amusing conversation with a dear friend. That's the voice I want for that. Now, with these other books, for example, Why Dogs Are Better Than Cats. Beautiful, funny book, incredible photos, incredible design. But I wrote that. I was in hospital after another of my adventure sports accidents and crashed a motorcycle in the Australian desert, was smashed to pieces. So I was in hospital for a long time, and I read a newspaper article saying how two things. First of all, how cats and cat owners completely eclipse the number of dog owners. Like, I was shocked at how many tens of millions more cats there were in the world than dogs, and how man's best friend had been left so far behind. And I wondered what that said about society. And then, of course, I found out that 10 million pet cats and dogs, mostly cats, are euthanized in America alone every year because no one wants them anymore. And it started making me ask questions about society. Who are we as people? That we have less time to immerse ourselves in a real relationship with a dog, and we want a pet that requires less emotional engagement and less space, less time, less of ourselves. And also, who is going to speak up about this horrible waste of life of people treating cats like last year's Christmas toys? So, it's a very, very funny book, but you're right. The hidden depth is that there's a real, very serious issue being raised and some very dark questions about who we truly are in that book. So behind all the laughter and the beautiful pictures, and the book has plenty of both, are some very serious questions. And Priceless, my book on biodiversity, was even more blatantly emotional and hardcore in terms of saying, hey, biodiversity is the greatest natural resource we could ever have, and we're killing it. But I like to end with positive outtakes. I don't like to just hammer the message down someone's throat. I want them to remember it. With this bear book, I just had a love of bears and a love of interesting cultures. But I want a story that, and this will sound a little bit silly, but I'll just tell you, I wanted a story that would almost be my fantasy life. What if I hadn't have left the paratroopers? What if I had stayed on that path that I was on, and lots of challenges, physical challenges, combat servers had come my way? If I follow that warrior path forever, how would that have turned out? And I wanted to tell that story through a vehicle that I understood, and that is nature. And so I thought that, I looked into the culture as I determine it of brown bears. I thought that will be the vehicle for this story. So in a way, it's a very personal journey of how I imagine my life could have been, but at the same time, it's translated through the natural world, which I already know very well and love very much. So I don't know if it'll work, but we'll find out. A year or two from now, we'll find out.
I'm looking forward to it. And I think that's where all the best stories come from, when you have that what if question, and it's something that you actually care about, as you said. Because if you don't care about it, you're not going to put the time and effort into it that you need to, and you're not going to be able to give it the emotional weight or energy. And really, why bother working on something that you don't love? Assuming
you can't do it. You can't do it.
Assuming you have that luxury.
Well, there's that. But, we're talking about the fact that this is a little bit of a luxury. It's not what my publishers are asking for from me.
They want Blue Day 2.
They want
more explosions.
That's right. They want Blue Day 6, Revenge of the Kittens, and that's fine. Hey, I am all about sequels. I love, and that's something for aspirant authors to keep in mind. To a certain point of view, it's easier to sell 3 books than one. You need to be thinking down the road, and it doesn't make you a capitalist whore. It makes you someone who is aware of the nature of the publishing industry. And when you go into these meetings and you speak with these people, you don't have to sell out, but you have to at least acknowledge what their point of view is and what their needs are. And
Yeah.
so often in the early stages, you could have made choices to give you an idea for the next book, not just for a novel, but for your series. So think about that, invest that creative energy, and come to the publisher with ideas that will help them do their job better, because their success is your success, right? So